Hello there. Welcome in to a Thursday edition of the show. So glad to have you, whether you're listening on your radio, streaming the show online at extrasports1300.com, or you've downloaded the new and improved Extra Sports 1300 app, sponsored by Diversus Health, mental health and well-being for all. A veritable cornucopia of sports topics await you, leading up to our coverage of Nuggets Bucks at 5:30. And if you'd like to have your say in the matter, you can call or text in your thoughts at 719-247-1313. Avs last night with a resounding win over the New Jersey Devils. And it left me thinking or wondering how much of that last night was Valeri Nichushkin and how much of it was the Avs' concerted effort to bounce back after two really tough losses over the weekend. And I suppose the answer to that question will be revealed over time. And for last night, the good news is they both happened at once. The Avs were in a position where they had to recover, had to bounce back from a terrible weekend. And the effort level certainly met that. And then you have Valeri Nichushkin also returning to the lineup, which both in a on ice X's and O's way helps you be a better hockey team. And then also from a mental standpoint, the boost it gives you to get someone that important to your team back in the lineup. But however you want to divvy out that pie and say that it was X percent this and X percent that, the energy level from the Colorado Avalanche was infinitely better than it had been the two previous games, and the execution level was infinitely better than it had been the previous two games. And the thing with Valeri Nichushkin and why he's a unique player is that as much as anything else, his game is about physicality, is about effort, is about being forceful, as Jonathan Drouin explains.
Everyone knows how Val is important to our team from so many standpoints, to the PK, to the power play, to 5-on-5. He's such a force out there, so we're very excited to have him back.
There's some gravity to Valeri Nichushkin. There's some perpetual force in his game. He's a hard-charging player. He's a physical player. And it's difficult to not meet that in some way when you're playing with Valeri Nichushkin on the ice. And it certainly looked better on the second line with Valeri Nichushkin back. But still, at the end of the night, you're saying the most damage and the most important damage, the most important goals, yeah, they tacked on late, but the most important goals were still scored by Nathan MacKinnon. The most important offense the Avalanche got in that game, and the bulk of the offense that got in that game, still came from the top unit. But no Casey Middlestat goal, whether it's in garbage time like last night or not, can be completely dismissed or overlooked. Okay, the fact of the matter is the guy was doing nothing. Valeri Nichushkin shows back up, and he has a goal. That's something worth monitoring as we move forward here. But still, at the end of the night, it was the big boys leading the charge. It was Nathan MacKinnon, and doing it on the power play, which I know last night was about Valeri Nichushkin, but how about this Avalanche power play? Nathan MacKinnon, even for all of his exploits, even for as good as he has been this year, and I want to spend some time today talking about just how good Nathan MacKinnon has been this season. He hadn't scored a power play goal since October. Like, the power play producing is a recent development. And Nathan MacKinnon, after the game, credited his ability to kind of play off Marty Necas a little bit better than he had before. And you saw it immediately, right? And I liken, Valeri Nichushkin's return last night to Marty Necas' debut with the Avalanche. Like, there were signs that you noticed immediately that, oh, this is better, right? Last night with Nichushkin back, the second line was better. Is it good enough? That's the perpetual question, and that's what has to be answered ultimately by Chris McFarland between now and the NHL trade deadline. But it looks better. There's no mistaking that. Same when Necas debuted against Boston. You watch the Avalanche power play and you're like, this looks better. They didn't produce anything. And you've been watching this power play with Marty Necas, and the movement is the biggest thing that stands out to you, because Mikko Rantanen had a habit of just kind of being stationary, right? With Necas, there's a lot more movement between these guys, and you could tell immediately that it looked better, and you could see Chris McFarland's thinking and saying, this is the guy I want as the centerpiece of my return for Mikko Rantanen. But we've seen this whole time, haven't seen the results. Last night you did with a couple of power plays. The bet that Chris McFarland is making with the addition of Marty Necas, it says maybe one day Marty Necas in an Avs sweater could be mentioned in the same breath as Mikko Rantanen. I don't think even he believed that Necas would be as good as Mikko Rantanen right away. But playing with one of the best players in the world, maybe there was a path there. Maybe there was a trajectory where he could be at some point. But what he thought would immediately get better is that power play. It's looked better for weeks now, and the results were better last night. And you look at Marty Necas, 12 points in 11 games since coming over. Meanwhile, as you've maybe heard, Mikko Rantanen's not having a great time in Carolina. 3 points in 8 games. So did the Avs win the trade? I wouldn't go that far. Because while I think Marty Necas has improved the Avs power play, I think that's what you can credit him with immediately. He's improved it. The issue with evaluating these trades, and it's almost the Saquon Barkley of it all, right? We can't be so beholden to this guy does this here and this guy does this here. Therefore, this is how we feel about the trade. Mikko Rantanen, we know what he's been in Colorado. So the one thing that I don't buy coming out of the talk about how this trade is going is the idea that somehow Chris McFarland dealt Mikko Rantanen at the right time, or that Mikko Rantanen isn't as good of a player as maybe he looked playing next to Nathan McKinnon. I know everyone looks better playing next to Nathan McKinnon, right? Marty Necas, you could, if you want to go down that road, you could say that Marty Necas looks so good because he's playing with Nathan McKinnon. You can diminish what he's doing at the same time. You should. That would be fair, right? To say that Mikko Rantanen isn't as good without Nathan McKinnon. Well, if you're impressed by Marty Necas, why do you think that is? So I don't really even want to get into all of that. But it is clear that Mikko Rantanen is not having the impact on the Carolina Hurricanes that they expected him to. Doesn't mean that the Avs are right to trade him because, again, I have a long history of what the Avalanche can do with Mikko Rantanen. But the trade certainly doesn't look like it's working out for the Carolina Hurricanes. They're not getting what they hope to out of Mikko Rantanen. And you could certainly say the Avs are getting more out of what they hope to get from Marty Necas. They're getting what they hope to, I think, now with Marty Necas. We're not going to answer who won the trade unless Carolina loses Mikko Rantanen for nothing. And then the Avs won the trade because they actually still have the players that were exchanged in the deal. But I just think it's a little intellectually dishonest to look at Mikko Rantanen in Carolina and saying that somehow justifies the move that the Avalanche made. That's the point I'm making here. The best thing about it is now you're seeing a power play that has looked better for weeks that now is producing better than it had recently. And Marty Necas is a big reason why. So that's what you love if you're an Avalanche fan. But this idea that the Avalanche are definitely better off overall, I don't buy that yet. And I don't buy that the Avalanche were right to trade Mikko Rantanen because look at what Mikko Rantanen's doing in Carolina. Same could be said for the argument with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope that has recently come back up because he's not having a great time now in Orlando. That team is starting to fade. And Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is not having the success he had in Denver. That's not Calvin Booth letting Kentavious Caldwell-Pope go at the exact right time as he was getting ready to decline. That we give general managers a bit too much credit when it comes to that. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is not as good with Orlando because he's not playing with Nikola Jokic. If Kentavious Caldwell-Pope was still playing with Jokic, I don't think we would see a drop-off. He would be the player he's been for the Denver Nuggets. So just because he's not having, I mean, this is what MVP means, right? At the heart of it. When we talk about the MVP, this is an impact that you expect an MVP to have. That players in their orbit are much better with them than they are without them. And you're seeing Mikko Rantanen with no Nathan McKinnon, even on an incredibly still talented Carolina Hurricanes team, not what he was in Colorado. And Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, very good role player for the Denver Nuggets with Nikola Jokic, not so much playing with Paolo Banchero. This is what you would hope the effect of an MVP is, that he makes everyone around him better. And Nathan McKinnon and Nikola Jokic do it about as well as any athlete in any sport. That Carolina thing, that's becoming a dicey situation. But I'm not ready to, build a statue of Chris McFarland because Mikko Rantanen's struggling in Carolina. I don't think that quite means that he did the exact right thing. Although last night, I think Chris McFarland feels a little bit of vindication. Because not only was, I think, he betting on the power play being better, a crucial aspect of the Avalanche game being better with Natchez, but also that the return of Valeri Nichushkin would also make the trade of Mikko Rantanen not hurt so much and not impact the team so much. Again, days before he traded him, he told, I think it was Altitude, that Valeri Nichushkin's the most underrated player in the NHL. So I think that's kind of what was in his thought process. And time will tell if he ultimately is right. But last night was a good night if you're Chris McFarland. 719-247-1313. Just getting going on this Thursday edition of the show. Coming up next, we talk a little NFL draft and something that I don't think the people who would like to see Ashton Genty in a Broncos uniform, I don't think they're talking about something enough when it comes to the running back out of Boise State. I'll get into it next here on Extra Sports 1300. This part of the NFL draft calendar is all about dream scenarios, right? We can really start to hammer in on what's likely and what's unlikely for every team in the NFL. But right now, it's just about, in an ideal world, what would you like? And for many Broncos fans, although the whole Joker conversation has certainly tilted it a different way, with, Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland and even a couple of these other tight ends, one out of Texas, one out of Miami. So I think those who take Sean Payton's comments to heart and say unequivocally whatever Sean Payton says they need, that's what they need, have gone the way of tight end and are focusing on that. But I think there's still a lot of people who think that Ashton Genty would be an ideal scenario for the Denver Broncos at number 20. And what's the number one worry that people have about running backs coming into the draft? Why has the NFL seemed to devalue the position, or at least perceived to devalue the position? I think in many ways they're just rethinking it. But a lot of people would say devalue, and that's fine. It's injuries, right? The investment that you're making in the first round is a significant one. And you are going to spend it on a position that has maybe the highest likelihood of any position to bust, not because of the talent, but because of the physicality that position brings, and it leads to injuries. And this in no way, shape, or form, from a talent perspective, I'm not arguing with Ashton Genty. Okay, I'm not going to go down the road of the level of competition and everything like that. I'm not. Dude's talent's undeniable. Okay, but I was looking into this last night. When the Denver Broncos drafted Bo Nix, I think a big driver was the amount of snaps he played in college. He's one of the most grizzled veteran rookies that we have ever seen, right? Because of COVID turnbacks and all that kind of stuff. And that was a plus for Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos. Can the same be said for Ashton Genty? Because while Ashton Genty didn't play for 5-6 years, he basically stuffed a 6-year college career into like 3 years. I was looking at Ashton Genty's workload at Boise State. Because, again, this is not about diminishing what he accomplished. He was fantastic. And I think he is incredibly talented. He carried the ball 746 times in his college career. If the idea is we only get so many carries in these running backs before they start to break down, that's really what it is with running backs. It's not an age thing as much as it is the number of carries before, just take Javonte Williams, right? You tear an Achilles, you pop a ACL, the cartilage in your knee wears down, whatever it might be. Like, it's a number of snaps thing, right? Ashton Genty carried the ball 746 times. One player that I think of that had one I set aside Derrick Henry because just from a physical standpoint, he is so different than anybody else. Maybe you could say Najee Harris is a bit in that mold. But Derrick Henry, part of the reason why he is still as productive as he is, despite the workload he has had, is because he is a physical specimen. And Ashton Genty is not built like Derrick Henry. Very few running backs are. So taking Derrick Henry out of the equation, you look at some of these high-profile running backs that have come out of college recently. None of these guys are even close to Ashton Genty. One of the guys that I can remember coming out of college that the biggest criticism of him, and it's not a criticism because it's not his fault. In fact, it's a compliment that he was so important to his team that he had that many carries, was Melvin Gordon. Remember when Melvin Gordon came out of Wisconsin? Melvin Gordon carried the ball 115 times less than Ashton Genty did. And the knock on Melvin Gordon coming out of Wisconsin is, oh, they used him too much. Wisconsin, they used their running backs too much. Can't invest in these guys. Ashton Genty has carried the ball 115 more times than Melvin Gordon did in his collegiate career. Some of these other running backs, and I looked at Sean Payton's guys, right? Alvin Kamara, not a great example because it's not even close. Alvin Kamara had 210 carries in college. Melvin Ingram, right? Had carried quite a bit of the load at Alabama. Almost 200 fewer carries in college than Ashton Genty. So for Sean Payton and his past history with valuing running backs, Ashton Genty has a workload that far surpasses anybody else that Sean Payton has invested in. Even when you look at some of the more recent backs, the only back that I have found that is even in the same universe as Ashton Genty is Breece Hall. Breece Hall's workload at Iowa State is at least in the ballpark. It's over 600 carries, which many running backs don't even hit that plateau. What happened to Breece Hall the minute he showed up in the NFL? Now, it could be just a freak accident. It may not have anything. Breece Hall got immediately hurt. And I think that at least the conversation around Ashton Genty should be less about who he went up against again in college and more about the amount of times that he went up against his competition. If you get what I'm saying. Almost 750 carries at a position that teams worry about durability. Now, he's proven to be durable, but he's going to get to the NFL, and that durability is going to be tested. Again, how many snaps, how many carries are left in Ashton Genty before injuries happen? Is that something that you're willing to use your first-round pick on? One of the, probably the number one asset that you can use to help Bo Nix is their pick at 20, because their cap space isn't what other teams have. So they're still a little hamstrung by the Russell Wilson deal. But this is one of the spots that you have the greatest opportunity to help continue Bo Nix's development. Is the reward versus the risk, because there's no doubt in my mind that Ashton Genty is the most talented running back in this class. Big reason why, of course, many people think that he would look great in a Broncos jersey because he's the best at what he does in this draft. But nearly 750 carries, it would worry me a little bit. And it should. Especially when you look at some of these other running backs that are in the draft. And a draft, mind you, that while Ashton Genty may be the best of the bunch, all you hear right now coming out of Indianapolis is the number of quality running backs there are in this draft. Sean Payton even talked about it. I mean, you want Ashton Genty and his 750 carries at 20, or you want to come back in the second round and grab Caleb Johnson out of Iowa, who had 510, or Travion Henderson out of Ohio State, who had 480. Certainly, an argument against Ashton Genty would be he doesn't catch the ball out of the backfield, which, if the Broncos' main priority is getting a joker, Ashton Genty is not a joker-like running back. But I think one thing that you would have to weigh against the talent is the workload that he had in college. From a talent standpoint, fits in quite well. Now, the way that Sean Payton employs running backs, or employs them but deploys them as well, you could argue it one of two ways. You could either say, well, even though Ashton Genty has that amount of work coming into the league, Sean Payton's not a bell cow running back type guy. Right? He's not going to use Ashton Genty the way that the Ravens use Derrick Henry. Okay. But on the flip side, doesn't that make drafting a running back with your number one pick not make a lot of sense? Especially if you kind of like what is in the running back room already. And I think that's where the Broncos are. They kind of like what's in there. They don't love it. But rumors are already out there that they want to bring back Javonte Williams because of his ability to block. Jaleel McLaughlin, I think everybody is on board. That's a guy worth continuing to feature moving forward. What are you going to do with Audric Estime? I mean, if we're talking about the Broncos' first pick, their highest profile pick, and maybe their highest profile acquisition they make all offseason. I don't know that running back makes the most sense. And I think that there are some concerns about making Ashton Genty that particular running back. I mean, if we're formulating the best Broncos board, I mean, I'm on board with everybody else. If Tyler Warren's there at 20, you grab him and you laugh all the way to the bank. I'm 100. Yeah, Tyler Warren is the dream if you're a Broncos fan. Colston Loveland, you can get behind, although I would point to recent history and tell you that tight end is actually one of the bigger boomer bust positions. And now you're getting the second best tight end. I still look at the wide receiver Kunga or out of Ohio State. Egbuka. I think he fits in with that room, assuming they're going to bring back Cortland Sutton, and it looks like they are, with the further development of Marvin Mims and the skill set he brings. I think Egbuka is a perfect fit. And then you can come back in the second round and look at the Amarion Hamptons, the Caleb Johnsons, the Travion Hendersons, the Dylan Sampsons of the world. I'm not denying that the Broncos need to get a running back in this draft. I wholeheartedly agree with that. But Sean Payton said it the other day. It's a position that, and in his mind, whenever Sean Payton says, I say this respectfully, definitely lean in and listen to what he's going to say, because it's definitely going to be either a straight out insult or a backhanded compliment. You can get them a lot of different ways. Meaning you can get them later. I know the talent of Ashton Genty is special. But is this the guy that the Broncos, in a crucial draft, in a crucial offseason, coming up on a crucial year, that's the guy they want to take? I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if somebody else grabbed Ashton Genty before the Broncos got on the board. I think that's probably the easiest fix. Because he'd be incredibly tempting, no doubt about it. Let somebody else take him before 20. 719-247-1313. Who's your ideal Broncos draft pick? Maybe it's a specific player. Maybe it's just a position. Take your thoughts on that. Speaking of the NFL and players long removed from their draft day, a further development and some closure on the Travis Kelce saga and what it means for the NFL and specifically the AFC West. That's after this. Genty today on Drive Time Sports. Got a text message in from Tom. Says, how can you not look at Genty's opponents? The Mount West was so far down last season. How do you not take that into account? He ain't going to be running against Mount West defenses next year. Now, to be clear, what I said was that I'm not going to go down that road of trolling Ashton Genty supporters or even really talk about it. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be a factor. That doesn't mean that you can't question it. To me, the bigger question mark with Ashton Genty is the amount of carries he has gotten. It's more about that than who he went up against. I think that the talent that Ashton Genty has, he is an NFL running back. I understand that the reason for his success can be somewhat attributed to the level of competition, but as any Boise State or Ashton Genty for the Heisman supporter will tell you, look at what he did against Oregon. Okay, the smallest of sample sizes, I get it. But he did run the ball very well against Oregon. I don't think there's any doubt that Ashton Genty is the best running back in this class. And playing against Group of 5 competition does not disqualify you from being a very productive player in the NFL. Kareem Hunt is from a Group of 5. Aaron Jones is from a Group of 5. There's another running back from the very same institution as Ashton Genty. His name is Doug Martin, that had a very productive NFL career. So I think you can take in his level of competition. You can take that into account. And if you do, maybe you get to the same place I'm getting to. Which is, if I'm a team that needs a decent or a lot of help. Like, I think Ashton Genty, perfect fit, and I'm not the first person to mention this, Dallas Cowboys. Right? They're locked into their quarterback. They're locked into their wide receiver. They're both varying levels of good. Right? You watch the Dallas Cowboys, and the big thing that's missing on the offensive side of the football is a running back. If Ashton Genty can put the finishing touch on an offense, then okay. But what type of teams are those? Dallas, but we know that they're not. The reason why they're picking where they're picking is because their season went off the rails in some part due to Dak Prescott's injury. Okay, you may not believe in the Dallas Cowboys, nor do I as a playoff team, but they're always there with Dak. So the Dallas Cowboys are a little bit different. They're where they are in the draft under different circumstances. But they would be a team where you look at it and you're like, there are not a lot of holes on the offensive side of the football. So adding in Ashton Genty would be good for them. You think about other teams. I look at for the Chiefs, I have a little bit of worry about Isaiah Pacheco moving forward. Could Ashton Genty be a good pick for the Chiefs? I wouldn't say the best pick they can make. They have other needs, but that kind of a mode. But those are teams that usually draft later in the 20s or even into the 30s. So my main reason for saying I would have hesitation in using my first-round pick on Ashton Genty is more due to his workload in college, even if you are somebody that wants to detract from what Ashton Genty did because of who he was playing against. I think we still arrive at the same place. I think he's still the best running back in this class. But there are concerns there that for a team like the Broncos that aren't one piece away on offense and are not one piece away on their team, I'd be a little bit careful. I do give more credit to a running back that is productive at a bigger school. Like, I think that that's fair. Higher level of competition, they deserve credit. I'm not going to take away too much from Ashton Genty playing against the Mount West. But I think you and I, Tom, arrive at the same spot, which is I have some qualms. Like, I'm seeing Ashton Genty go to the Raiders in a lot of mock drafts. No. Well, Raiders in a situation where they say that they want to start winning immediately, given the number of holes they have on their roster, Ashton Genty is going to be their pick at 6. I'm not on board with that. I think that the Broncos, even sitting at 20, would be wise to take advantage of the depth. And that's part of the draft. Right? Part of the draft is identifying the strengths of it and playing the board a little bit here. If there are 2 elite tight ends, and we'll see with Elijah Arroyo out of Miami and the kid out of Texas, and see, as we find out more about them, where they line up and how early they're going to go and everything like that. But let's just take tight end and say, really, it's Warren, and then there's a pretty significant drop off, and then the next guy up is Colston Loveland. Well, if one of those 2 guys is on the board and you're the Broncos and you need a tight end, even if you need a running back, what do you prioritize? With the idea that the crop of tight ends is not going to be nearly as good when you get back on the board with your second pick as it will be for running backs. You got to play the draft board a little bit. I know that everybody is laughing in my face and other people's faces that said that it was a reach to take Bo Nix where they did. But there's still some of that drafting value and playing the board and seeing, all right, can we get this guy later? Should we prioritize this position now because there's more depth at this other position? The great news for the Denver Broncos, regardless of who your top priority is, a lot of the things that the Broncos need are in abundant supply in this draft. This does have the chance to be a very fruitful draft for the Broncos, where we look at it and, like, not only did they get quality players, but they got the argument of best player available versus drafting for need. We can both sides of that argument can come together, because I think that the Broncos have a chance to get a really good player at 20, and I think they have a chance to address a lot of their needs at 20 and beyond. When it comes to running back, I would look to beyond. If it's tight end, I would look early. If it's wide receiver, I would look early. 719-24-7. 1313. Travis Kelce, just to kind of put a bow on his whole episode this offseason, text Pat McAfee today that he's coming back this season and he's not going to go out like that. And this coming off of an earlier report that he was battling illness all week. And I'm not asking you to believe it, but I look at Travis Kelce in the Super Bowl and I say that could look like a guy that was sick. because he had very low energy. He just wasn't there. So was he sick? I don't know. Believe what you want. But the thing that's going to put an end to this Chiefs dynasty is not them losing to the Eagles in the Super Bowl. It's going to be when they start losing their key players. And that doesn't look like it's going to happen now that Travis Kelce is coming back. And I do believe that he's going to be motivated. And I said this yesterday. He better be. And that text that he sent, Pat McAfee, says that Travis Kelce, whatever the reason was that he looked the way he did in the Super Bowl, which whether it was illness, whether it was contemplating retirement, whatever it was, that wasn't it. That's not the Travis Kelce that the Chiefs need to succeed. Sending a text and being like, I'm not going out like that. That means the Kansas City Chiefs are getting a motivated Travis Kelce. Just want to put bow on that. Oh, and Gronk, the reports of him coming back are ridiculous. By Gronk's own words. Or I'm paraphrasing, but he was not entertaining a comeback. So we could put that to bed as well. So all the tight end stuff we can put to bed. It's all been resolved and we can move on with our lives. 719-24-7-1313. Coming up next, just how good has Nathan McKinnon been this season for the Avalanche and why the answer to the question of the best hockey player in the world is not as easy to answer as it once was. Welcome in Drive Time Sports on this Thursday. Ryan Kaufman with you. You can watch the show live on a daily basis on our social media platforms at Extra Sports 1300, Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube. I think that covers it. 719-247-1313 is the number. Every time, without fail, Brett, Travis Kelce's text to Pat McAfee is one of the biggest stories in sports today. I spend 2 minutes on it at the end of the first hour. And you have to come in. Can you give Len Dawson a full hour? Well, there's some reasons why that would be very difficult to pull off. But I know why you're doing this. Anytime I mention the Kansas City Chiefs, it's everyone goes, oh, here we go again. It's one of the biggest stories in sports today. And I spent 2 minutes on it. Can't win with you people. But I do every day get up and do my best to win you over. 719-247-1313. You know, it used to be an unthinkable concept that anyone not named Connor McDavid could be considered the best hockey player in the world. And for the record, I still think he's the answer to that question. But we have to acknowledge the amount of ground that Nathan MacKinnon has made up on Connor McDavid recently. Three years ago, Nathan MacKinnon had 111 points in just 71 games. Because I was thinking about this with this year. He's on pace for about 120 points. And how insane that is. And then I remember the 2022-2023 season where he had 111 points in fewer games. That was maybe the finest statistical season of Nathan MacKinnon's career to date, and he wasn't even close to winning MVP because Connor McDavid cleared him by 42 to be exact. That was the year that Connor McDavid had 153 points, and it's like, come on. You can't go anywhere else but Connor McDavid. And that's been kind of the default position of hockey people over the years. You just can't, you don't even need to entertain the idea that anyone other than Connor McDavid is the best player in the world. So that year, Connor McDavid cleared Nathan MacKinnon by 42 points. Last year, Connor McDavid cleared him by 30 points. This year, Nathan MacKinnon, now with 90 points, is 18 clear of Connor McDavid. Now, I can acknowledge, and in no way, shape, or form am I saying 1 year is enough to completely change the conversation. Right? Because when Joel Embiid won the MVP over Nikola Jokic, that did not automatically make Joel Embiid the best player in the world. It's a rolling total. It's multiple years. It's not just one MVP. So Nathan MacKinnon winning one MVP is not enough to say, oh, he's the best player in the world now. It's not the Highlander. That's not the way it works. And I do think this year is a down year by Connor McDavid standards, and there's no reason to think that this is somehow the start of a trend where he's going to continue to go down. But even you look over the last few years, Nathan MacKinnon's kind of gaining some ground, right? He's closing the gap in terms of the difference in scoring. Nathan MacKinnon's won a Stanley Cup. He's won an MVP. If he wins another one this year, he's going to be one back of Connor McDavid this great moment that hockey had last week in the Four Nations, Nathan MacKinnon was the best player in it. So you just start to add all of this up. And again, this is not an argument to say that Connor McDavid has relinquished best player in the world, but it's not an immediate, like, you got to think about it. You got to take a beat, because the last couple of years of Nathan MacKinnon's career make you at least pause for a moment, or at least in inevitably getting to Connor McDavid, mention, Nathan MacKinnon's been really good lately and maybe been better. And this year he's been better. I mean, there's no way to spin that. Nathan MacKinnon has been better than Connor McDavid this year. And Nathan MacKinnon last year was better than Connor McDavid. So back-to-back years where Nathan MacKinnon has outperformed, because Connor McDavid's not going to sniff the MVP. Nathan MacKinnon could win it. I think he should. I think he will. The gap is closing here. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing. And I'm fine with Connor McDavid still being the answer to that question. And you watch these two guys play and you say they're both amazing, but Connor McDavid is better. But this run that Nathan MacKinnon is on has closed that gap. And you think about it too, over these last few years, while Nathan MacKinnon's production has gone up and he has raised his game, it's been out of necessity. Right? They lose Gabriel Landeskog after they win a Stanley Cup. They now don't have Mikko Rantanen. Yes, Cale Makar is still there. But this Avalanche team has gotten worse, and Nathan MacKinnon's gotten better. And in terms of production, Leon Draisaitl laps Cale Makar. So you want to talk about who has the better sidekick, it still is Connor McDavid. You even look at the share of the points. Nathan MacKinnon used to be around 30% of the points scored by the Avalanche, goals and assists. Nathan MacKinnon accounted for a little less than a third, which is elite level. Like, there's only a handful of guys in the league that are that productive and mean that much to their team. You're talking McDavid, you're talking Draisaitl, you're talking Pasternak, you're talking Austin Matthews, like the elite players in this game, MVPs, MVP candidates. Connor McDavid's been at 40. That's how special he's been. Well, you look at the last few years, Nathan MacKinnon is now gone from 30 to 32 to 35, and now he's trending up near 40%. Connor McDavid territory in terms of the lion's share of the points that he gets for the Colorado Avalanche. It's the trajectory that Nathan MacKinnon is on. I am at least fascinated to see where it ends up and where the conversation is 3 years from now, even a year from now. I mean, think about too, the Olympics, right? So they're going to be teammates again, McDavid and MacKinnon. What if McKinnon's the best player in the Olympics? I mean, all of this is not even a thought, like as recently as 2 years ago. And now Nathan MacKinnon is he's winning individual accolades and he's outscoring Connor McDavid, and his team gets worse, and yet his numbers are better and his level of play seems to keep going up. Now, if he wins a second MVP, and if he can win a Stanley Cup, he's going to continue to close this gap. As I have it right now, as far as the MVP is concerned, I think it's really 3 players. We're far enough along that we can say, you know what? We're closing it. We got our finalists. This is the list. It is Draisaitl, it is McKinnon, and it is Connor Hellebuyck. That's the list. Short of one of these 3 guys falling off the face of the earth or somebody else, and maybe it's Connor McDavid. Maybe we need to leave the door slightly ajar in case Connor McDavid goes galactic and goes on a tear that we have not ever seen before. But really, that's the list. It's Draisaitl, it's McKinnon, and it's Hellebuyck. And this is shaping up to be like 2020, which wasn't good news for Nathan McKinnon, if you recall. But in 2020, it was the closest vote we have had in a very long time. The one other race that was closer than 2020 was what to this day continues to be a pox on the house of all NHL MVP voters when they picked Taylor Hall over Nathan McKinnon. That was the closest vote I've ever seen. And it's one of the closest votes in the history of the Hart Trophy. And that was a mistake. They got it wrong. Nathan McKinnon deserved it over Taylor Hall. So we really should be talking about Nathan McKinnon going for his 3rd MVP this year and not just his 2nd. But I digress. 2020, Leon Draisaitl beat out Nathan McKinnon by 43 first-place votes, which is close. Nathan McKinnon, by those standards, blew out Nikita Kucherov. Connor McDavid has gotten a unanimous MVP in that time. Like, we're talking 100, 150 first-place votes that have been the difference. And that vote in 2020, 43 first-place votes was what separated Leon Draisaitl to Nathan McKinnon. And I think we're lining up for something close to that. Because in that year where I think Nathan McKinnon had a very good case, I certainly don't look at 2020 like I do the year that Taylor Hall won. That was a miscarriage of NHL justice when Taylor Hall won. But when Leon Draisaitl won, I thought there was a better argument for Nathan McKinnon to win MVP over Leon Draisaitl. But I understood why Leon Draisaitl was the MVP. In that year, Leon Draisaitl outscored Nathan McKinnon by 17 points. That was the difference. And Nathan McKinnon right now, with no Mikko Rantanen, with no Gabriel Landeskog, as he had both of those guys back in 2020, it's going to be a slimmer margin, and Nathan McKinnon might beat out Leon Draisaitl. But I think that's where we're going down to. I think Hellebuyck deserves to be a finalist. I think the betting market will tell you that Draisaitl is a heavy favorite at -140. and then Connor Hellebuck and Nathan McKinnon are at the same level. I think that's wrong. I think it's Draisaitl and McKinnon who are the ones that should be very close together, and then there should be a gap before you get to Connor Hellebuck. Because there is a lot going right with the Winnipeg Jets in front of Connor Hellebuck. It hasn't been all him. But it's looking like history might repeat itself, except I think it will be the reverse. I think in one of the closer votes that we're going to see in recent NHL MVP history, Nathan McKinnon will beat out Leon Draisaitl. And that will be his second MVP. He should have 3. And Connor McDavid would have 3. Nathan McKinnon with the Stanley Cup. Connor McDavid without. You got to take a beat before you inevitably answer that Connor McDavid is the best player in the world. He is. And 1 year's not going to change that. But Nathan McKinnon's been hard at work at this for like the last 3 years, and he's gaining ground. Another great night for him last night. 3.92 goals and an assist. He now has 90, and he's leading the NHL in scoring as the Avs beat the Devils last night. More on that game coming up in a little bit. Coming up next. So you're in the market for a quarterback in the NFL draft, are you? Well, what are your chances of hitting on either Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders? I did the work. See if you agree with it next on Extra Sports 1300. So you're in the market for a quarterback in April's draft. Denver Broncos can't relate. They got their guy. But there are many teams that have yet to find their Bo Nix or that special someone to make their franchise whole. And this draft is, in many ways, the antithesis of last year's when it comes to the quarterback position. Because in last year's draft, there was one guy that stood out above the rest in Caleb Williams, right? As we got closer to the draft, I think the gap between he and Jaden Daniels shrunk a little bit, but it was Caleb Williams. That was the guy. But there were all these other quarterbacks that you could see going in the first round. And guess what? They did. Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, of course. It was one of the most quarterback-rich drafts that we had seen recently. And now we turn the page 1 year later, and there's two guys. Now, Jackson Dart's interesting to me. Does Jackson Dart, over this process, get in the first-round conversation? I think he may get there. But right now, it's Cam Ward and Shedeur. And all I have seen right now are people saying that one of those two quarterbacks, Shedeur Sanders, is not all he's cracked up to be. So you have two, and then the talk diminishing one of those two. We're just a couple of weeks away from somebody going on ESPN or NFL Network and proclaiming that Cam Ward is the only franchise quarterback potentially in this draft. And then inevitably it will swing back the other way. Shedeur will get back in the good graces of these mock draft people. And then they'll start to pick on Cam Ward. And then there will be a time where Shedeur is the clear number one and Cam Ward's too much of a project. This is how it works. You know, Sean Payton talked about this the other day. Again, one of those comments that he makes where he prefaces it by saying, I say this respectfully. And he talked about this all last year, right? The cottage industry that is the NFL draft and the entertainment product that comes along with it. And sometimes people are just out to entertain, which there's no problem. That's not an issue. It's kind of in large part what all of this is. Sports media is entertainment. But you just, to Sean Payton's point, you have to be a little bit careful about buying into it too much. Because these draft analysts will talk themselves in and out of prospects. They'll throw out things on a mock draft that are not necessarily based in reality. They're just out to elicit a response. And all this is good. All this is fine. But Sean Payton says you need to be careful. And that was a big thing that he said in defense of his pick of Bo Nix. But I went back and looked because with two guys, it's kind of a little bit more clear cut, right? When there's a third, a fourth, maybe even in this past year's case, a fifth guy, that's a little harder to gauge how many of them are going to hit because we don't usually get that. This year, you got two guys. You got Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward. So I went back and looked the last 25 years. And as subjective as it is, I split them into two groups. And these two groups are good and bad. That's it. Good and bad. The more nuanced explanation is the draft picks that if you were a fan of that team, you were happy about. When all was said and done, you said, that was good. And then, of course, the quarterbacks that you don't have a very good experience with. And I split them into two columns. I'll save you doing that live on air. And what I came up with was 23 quarterbacks in about the last 25 years would be in the good column, right? Maybe not all of them are Super Bowl winning quarterbacks or MVPs. But you look back and say they were worth the pick. And they did some good. And then there are 29 that didn't do any of that. So you get 44%. You have a 44% chance, less than 50-50, that the quarterback you take in the first round is going to hit, is going to work, that you're not having remorse over making that pick. Less than a 50% chance. This is what the Broncos have been dealing with until they got Bo Nix, at least for now. Because there are years that I did not include in this, including this past year. Because we don't know if any of these guys are going to be in one group or another. We have thoughts, and we can get into that. But we don't know. These 52 quarterbacks that I grouped, I think were pretty decided. There are a few that maybe you think should go in one column or the other. But based on what I did with I guess we'll call it margin for error of about 2 or 3 quarterbacks that maybe I'm higher on than others are or lower on that than others are. Less than a 50-50 chance that you're just going to be pleased with what you get. Because some of the quarterbacks in this group, Lawrence, Love, Herbert, Tua, are those fan bases ecstatic about what they have right now? But those guys, I think, have been, to this point, good. Varying levels of good, but good. Not everybody is Burrow, Lamar, Allen, Mahomes, the current ruling class of the NFL quarterback. So I'm higher on some guys than other people would be. I'm lower on some guys than other people would be. But about 44%, less than 50%. And then if you do want to take it a step further and say, well, how about the guys that really hit? Right? We weren't just pleased with this guy. We were ecstatic about this guy. MVP caliber, Super Bowl winning quarterback. That vein, right? Here's the list that I came up with. Rodgers, Ryan, Flacco, Stafford, Cam, Luck, Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, Burrow. The last 25 years. That's it. That's the list. And who's to say that some of these guys that were drafted later, like I'm looking at Lamar Jackson. Is there a chance that someday in the next couple of years that we drop Lamar Jackson out of that? It sounds unthinkable, and I don't think I will, but some will. If Lamar Jackson doesn't break through and win a Super Bowl here soon, some people are going to drop him out of that list. And that's going to bring the percentage down. Essentially, it is and I'm not big on implied probability, so I know it's not. I'd be interested to see what the implied probability of it all is. But just based on this math, that means you have a 17% chance that the guy you get is going to be everything you hoped and dreamed he would be. And that might be generous. Again, it might actually be lower than that. But at best, 17% chance. Are either of these quarterbacks capable of fitting into the 17%? I've said that Shador's absolute highest ceiling is Joe Burrow. And I don't think that he's going to be Joe Burrow. But we're talking ceiling floor. We're talking about if Shador Sanders unlocks every ounce of potential that he has, he could be Joe Burrow. How many quarterbacks actually unlock their maximum potential? I would say that percentage is pretty small. I don't think Shador is going to be Joe Burrow. I would say Shador is going to end up on the good side. But even again, what about the circumstances that he finds himself in? Again, we have evolved on this subject to say some of these guys that I would put in the bad column, some of it's them, right? Jamarcus Russell. I think that was on Jamarcus Russell. Johnny Manziel. I think that was on Johnny Manziel. I think they were a bust in the traditional sense. But there are other quarterbacks on this list. Like, for instance, RG3. RG3 has to be characterized as a bust. How much did Washington get from RG3? Well, was that his fault? So we've evolved and understand that some of these quarterbacks that don't make it, it's not because of them as much as it is the circumstances they find themselves in. But this is the world that the Broncos have been living in since Peyton Manning, and now they have Bo Nix. And in the thought that I had out of this, because I think J.J. McCarthy, obviously, we don't know. We know nothing about, right? Can't say he's a bust. Can't say he's trending in the right, wrong direction. We have no idea. Michael Penix is just ahead of him on that list. Everybody else, you may rethink who the best quarterback in this draft is. But I think Bears fans are still believing in Caleb Williams. Commanders fans certainly believe in Jaden Daniels. Broncos fans believe in Bo Nix. Patriot fans, I think, are still very high on Drake May. This class is going to be an interesting study moving forward because they come into the league at the time where our eyes are wide open and we're understanding how busts happen. We used to just pin it on the quarterback. Now we have a more holistic approach to it and understand these other factors. But also the teams do. The teams are more cognizant of it. Could this group of quarterbacks be coming into the league at the time where teams are a little bit more careful and deliberate and make more decisions that are for the betterment of their young quarterback than maybe 10, 20 years ago? And could that be ultimately the reason we look back in 5 or 10 years and say, man, outside of 83, that was about as good of a quarterback draft as we have ever had with Caleb Williams and Drake May and Bo Nix. We had more franchise quarterbacks in that draft than any since 1983. But I like both Cam Ward and Shador Sanders. I do, and I think they have both the potential to be good NFL starting quarterbacks. But history will tell you that only one of them is going to work. For whatever reason, only one of these two guys are going to work, and that right now they're the only two options. If you are in the market for a quarterback in April. I think just overall, another reason why, if you're a Broncos fan, you are very glad that Bo Nix is in Denver. 719-247-1313. More Drive Time Sports after this. Welcome back, Drive Time Sports. Just heard on NFL Network now that the Indianapolis Colts are going to have an open competition for their quarterback position, which plays in quite well to what I was just discussing about these quarterbacks that are busts or not busts. Anthony Richardson very quickly moving towards bust because it feels like a last-ditch effort from the Colts to say, we're going to put him in a competition, and we hope that gets the best out of Anthony Richardson. And if that doesn't work, then we are all out of ideas. Said 23 of the 52 quarterbacks prior to 2023. So from 05 to 23, 44% hit rate. And even within that is some variability because there are quarterbacks that have been, these franchise-altering quarterbacks and some that are just good. Like Matt Ryan, for instance, didn't win a title, won an MVP. There isn't a little bit there that Falcon fans would say we should have gotten more out of him. How about Cam Newton in Carolina? Would Jared Goff, if you throw in what he's done in LA and Detroit, but just what he did in LA, did the Rams feel like they got everything they could? I mean, I have him in the good category, and at the very least, if the Rams were unhappy with their returns from Jared Goff, they could at least say they flipped him for Stafford, who ended up winning them a Super Bowl. So the assets they got from it worked out for him. Is Sam Darnold playing himself into the other category? Because I had Darnold down as a bust. Because I feel like what he does 4 or 5 years down the road for his fifth different team is not enough to characterize Sam Darnold as being anything other than a bust. Credit to him for rebuilding his career, and he's going to get paid handsomely by somebody to quarterback them, but that does little to comfort Jet fans. And he's made a couple of stops since before he got to Minnesota and had the year he had. And also, it's just 1 year. I mean, RG3, again, through no fault of his own, but RG3 is a bust because RG3, we only got a little bit out of him before he was done. So to be in the good column, you got to have more than just a year or two of productivity. That's why RG3 and Darnold are in the latter category. But if you looked at the quarterbacks the last 2 years, because I think it's really too early to tell on any of them. 2023. Where would you put Bryce Young? Which column is he hovering over? Because I think he was a nice story, but I got to see how he follows it up. I think he's still heading to the bust column. But maybe Carolina figured out a way for him to salvage his career. He's going to get another crack at it. Andy Dalton will be there in tow to help him out. I think he's heading towards bust. CJ Stroud, certainly you feel like is in the good column, even if he wasn't as good this year as he was his rookie year. Still another very good year for C.J. Stroud. And now you have Anthony Richardson, who is one step away from having his name in Sharpie in the bust. If he doesn't win this quarterback competition that the Colts say they're going to have, he's a full-out bust. And then you look at this year, Caleb Williams, again, is so early. I think you have hope. I don't know if you have a ton of evidence after year one, but you still have hope moving forward if you're the Bears that Caleb Williams is going to hit. Jaden Daniels goes without saying. Drake May. Again, I think the Patriots feel good about it. Penix. We'll find out. McCarthy, we don't know anything about. Bo Nix, certainly. But let me spin this forward a little bit, because my thought about Bo Nix, and I thought it going into the draft, and I still think it here going into year two. There is going to come a point to what I said earlier about Matt Ryan and Cam Newton. Is there a point in Bo Nix's career? And it's not year two. But before he's out of his rookie contract, where you look at it and you go, yeah, I think they could do better. I think we're going to get to that point with Bo Nix. That's not right now, so live in the moment. And this guy has been the answer to what the Broncos have been looking for years. In year two, I think he has a good chance of being better, but year 3, year 4, year 3 is going to be a huge year, because I'm not buying into this idea that the Broncos are ready to topple Kansas City. I don't. And you could call me a homer all you want. I don't care. The Broncos are not ready to knock off Kansas City. Now, maybe beat them in the game. Sure, we've seen them do that. But Sean Payton's been setting everything up that watch out for the Broncos to win the AFC West and to go deep in the playoffs. Because if you beat Kansas City, if you topple Kansas City, then how many other teams do you have to worry about? So as long as you're keeping your expectations from running amok, I think this could still be a honeymoon-like year with Bo Nix, because I do think he can be better. I do think, because of who Bo Nix is, I think he'll work tirelessly to be better. I think his supporting cast is going to be better. But then that sets up year 3, where you're going, okay, now it's not, we think you got to knock off Kansas City. Especially if Travis Kelce, if there's a last ride thing here, last dance thing for Travis Kelce this year, and the Chiefs start to, lose some guys. Then the expectations are really going to go up for Bo Nix. And is he going to be able to live up to those? I think if the Broncos get 3 good years out of Bo, make the playoffs 2 out of the 3 years, 3 out of the 3 years, I think he has a good chance of being in the good column. But there are guys in this column, like I have Baker Mayfield in the good column. Was he what the Browns hoped he would be? I don't think so. Now, certainly they did not do well in replacing him. But I always said about the Deshaun Watson trade, like, I understand why they looked at Baker Mayfield and said, we need to do better. We have to be better than this. Now, they missed, they whiffed. They should not have traded for Deshaun Watson, of all people. but I understand the emotion behind it. Yeah, he did well enough, but expectations went up. And Baker Mayfield wasn't at that level. And it forced the Browns into a terrible, horrible, very bad mistake, to the point that they wish they had Baker Mayfield back. They would sign up for one and done in the playoffs every year. But that's what's going to happen. And not just to Bo Nix. All of these guys. Jaden Daniels. Here's the same path that Jaden Daniels is going down. So this year was all gravy, was amazing. One of the best stories in the NFL. Next year, what does he need to do? What's a successful season for Jaden Daniels? Or is this house money, and as long as Washington finds themselves in the playoffs, it's all good? And maybe that's the case, but then what's year 3? And it's like the Commanders got to compete for a Super Bowl, right? So it's not just Bo Nix. It's every one of these quarterbacks and all of these drafts. Even if they have early success, the expectations go up, and there's a very small number of quarterbacks. I mean, if you want to be really strict about it, Rodgers has won a Super Bowl and multiple MVPs. Mahomes is Mahomes. I think Josh Allen, I think some people would omit Lamar. I think they would omit Cam Newton. I think they would omit Matt Ryan. Now you're talking about an even smaller group of quarterbacks that had success. The expectations went up, and they met those expectations. And that's the stuff that really gets you in trouble. Right? If you start looking at Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders and saying that's what they have to be. If you're a Browns fan and saying, well, we're in a division with Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow. We need to get somebody that's on par with those. Then you're setting Shedeur Sanders up for absolute failure, because very, very few guys. There are guys like Cam Newton and Matt Ryan who had terrific Hall of Fame careers. Is Cam Newton? Maybe I want to backtrack on that. They may not be Hall of Famers, but great, like MVP, they went to Super Bowls. Not a lot of these guys on the list can say they went to a Super Bowl and won an MVP. Very good careers for some of these guys. Still didn't live up to the expectations that were then placed on them after their early successes. That's where you get into trouble. 719-247-1313. Coming up next, we'll hit the 3 stories that are driving the show. Hello there. Welcome in. Drive Time Sports on a Thursday. Nuggets and Bucks coming up at the bottom of the hour. Appreciate you stopping by, whether you're listening or watching the show. Although when you're watching, you're probably both watching and listening. I already struggle to give compelling content as it is. I don't think I can be compelling with the sound off. But I appreciate your patronage, certainly. Mentioned Nuggets Bucks, so we're all good. Let's go ahead and hit the three stories that are driving the show. All right, story number one. Val was back and his presence was felt as the Colorado Avalanche put in an inspired performance in a 5-1 win over the New Jersey Devils. And you could just, the physicality and the force with which Valeri Nichushkin plays with, I think rubbed off on his teammates. It's hard not to play that way when you're on the ice with Valeri Nichushkin. And I think that's him scoring goals, although he did have a couple of cracks at it. Some of that timing, some of the skill stuff, that takes a little while to come along. But the way he plays, which I think the rest of the team feeds off of, that can be immediate. And I thought it was last night. But ultimately, the bulk of the production when it mattered, when the game was still in the balance, came from the big boys led by Nathan MacKinnon, who had not one but two power play goals last night. And what last night was, more than anything else, was a very good night for Chris McFarland, the general manager of the Avalanche. Because the Mikko Rantanen trade was really about three players. And I think expectations were pretty in control when it came to Jack Drury. I don't think he was being acquired to be like this force multiplier, game-changing player, but he was a depth piece that the Avs needed. Perhaps he hasn't quite made the impact that the Avalanche would have hoped he would have made by now. But it was really, the headline was about Marty Necas, of course, but it was also about Valeri Nichushkin. And Chris McFarland's idea here about trading Mikko Rantanen was that Necas would be a more than adequate replacement, but also with Valeri Nichushkin, the Avs could maintain their level of play. They could maintain after losing a player like Mikko Rantanen. So with the immediate impact that you could feel from Valeri Nichushkin and the fact that the power play finally produced some results, and Marty Necas was a big reason why, that was a good night for Chris McFarland. But here is the remaining question. While Casey Mittelstadt got a goal, is that the start of something? Or was it just him tacking on and picking on a goaltender that just about quit on his team last night? Jake Allen, once he gave up the fifth goal, he skated right to the bench. He's like, I'm done. Not a great look from Jake Allen, to be quite honest. But garbage time goals, while, look, you'll take anything you get from Casey Mittelstadt, is not why you brought in Casey Mittelstadt. You brought him in to be a productive second-line center and to be able to impact the game and help the Avs win games when it matters. not just tacking on to a blowout win. Here's my trade deadline scenario, and I saw this, ESPN had this out there, and I kind of like it. What about the Shens? What about both of them? Braden and Luke. You get your depth defenseman. You get a second line center. Neither is a blockbuster deal. But let's be real. What blockbuster deals are out there? For the Avs to make a blockbuster deal, trading Mikko Rantanen is quite rare, as trade deadlines usually fail to live up to expectation. But to make two, make one, and then a couple months later make another one, that's basically unheard of in the NHL. But how about the Shens? I think that would be good. I'm not buying into a garbage time goal by Casey Middlestat means all is well. And I don't know that he can do much else in the next week to sway me the other way. I've seen too much, and I've seen enough. The Avs need to upgrade there. I was with the idea of landing Casey Middlestat. I praise the acquisition. I'm wrong right alongside Chris McFarland about Casey Middlestat. But you can't be so set in your ways and be so stubborn that you're unwilling to pivot. It's still a young player that should have some trade value around the league for teams that are not in contention, like the St. Louis Blues. I think they could welcome somebody like Casey Middlestat, as their timeline is not the Avalanche timeline. But it is something to monitor over the next week, whether we saw, on the heartbeat monitor, we saw a little blip last night with Casey Middlestat. Is Valeri Nichushkin enough to revive him? We'll see. But Avs get back on the winning side of things. 5-1 over the New Jersey Devils. Story number 2, the cap number in the National Football League has been set at a whopping 200. What am I doing? 100. That's NHL salary cap is 100. $279.2 million. The highest cap in the history of the National Football League. So you may ask, well, how does that impact the Denver Broncos? Interestingly enough, the Broncos still rank in the same spot in terms of cap space. Why could that be? Cap went up. Broncos have more money now. How can they still be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15th in cap space? Oh, that's right, because it went up for everybody else. Something that was some point of logic that was lost on some of the more boisterous Bronco fans on social media. So how does this impact the Denver Broncos? It really doesn't. Not really, because it impacts everybody. The people who are celebrating are the players, right? Because there's a chance to make more money. But the Broncos have more money. Doesn't mean they can outbid the Patriots or the Commanders for T. Higgins. Those two teams still sit 1 and 3 in cap space. So it really doesn't impact the Denver Broncos that much. But it is interesting to note that is the highest salary cap, and the Broncos will have more money. But now the players will demand more money. That's how this works. How do they spend it? I think you extend Courtland Sutton. I think there's something to be said for Courtland Sutton being one of those guys that you weren't quite sure about his future and played himself into a long-term future with the Denver Broncos. I think you take care of Courtland Sutton. Now, you don't have to pay him T. Higgins money, nor should he be demanding that, but I think you spend some money on him. Seems like they want to bring back DJ Jones, want to extend him, Nick Bonito. Now, I said this. I think a lot of the assets and monies that the Denver Broncos have at their disposal will be spent on the defensive side of the football and the lion's share of it is going to be internally. I just don't see an offseason full of fireworks, which is what makes pick number 20 so vital, so crucial to the Denver Broncos' improvement this season, because I think they're going to be spending a lot of time this offseason taking care of their guys, which is good. But that's not necessarily how you improve your football team. And story number 3, also out of the NFL, specifically out of Dateline, Indianapolis, Travis Hunter. Just in case you thought maybe he's giving up on this whole two-way player thing. Nope, double down on it. And he said he wants to play 100% of the snaps at wide receiver and 100% of the snaps at defensive back. The team that drafts Travis Hunter is going to have to kind of battle two opposing forces, because I think it would be a grave mistake of any NFL team to make Travis Hunter one or the other. That is a bad organization that would do that. And one thing that Travis Hunter said today that I completely agree with, and it's going to come across as boisterous, but it's a fact. He's different. He's different. And if anybody has the chance to be a full-blown wide receiver and a full-blown defensive back at the NFL level at the same time, it's Travis Hunter. And the team that drafts him, I think, owes it to him to give it a shot and owes it to their team. Because how amazing would that be for any football team that would have two players for the price of one? So they're going to have to fight back against those who say, well, it's too hard. Can't do that. Got to make them one or the other. Got to fight against those people. But especially early on, you're going to have to fight against Travis Hunter. Because while I do believe that Travis Hunter will be able to play both sides of the football, I think there's going to have to be a balancing act early on. And if he gets 60% of his snaps or 80% or 70%, whatever it might be on one side of the football, I would say defense, then offense, it doesn't mean that he's never going to be that other thing. But it's about developing the talent that is Travis Hunter, and to make him 100% both things at all times, I think might be too difficult. That's where I temper the expectation with Travis Hunter. Fact that he's going to play every snap of every NFL game other than special teams in his rookie year, I think that's too pie in the sky. I really do. I think you give him both sides of the ball. I think you incorporate him on both sides of the ball and show him and explain to him that there is a path if he continues to, do the work and to comprehend these very complicated schemes and assignments on both sides of the football, and he keeps putting that work, there will be the opportunity for him to do exactly what he did at CU and play every snap. But early on, it's too much. It's too much to give Travis Hunter right out of the gate. And I don't think that's me, putting down Travis Hunter or doubting Travis Hunter. I think that's just good development. We talk about quarterbacks. You don't want to give them the whole playbook right away. You don't want to ask them to win you football games in week 2. That was the mistake that I thought Sean Payton made. One of the few mistakes he made in his development of Bo Nix's rookie year. He made him do way too much early on in the season. I think the desperation level went up for the Broncos to win those early games. I think he asked Bo Nix to do too much. It was an early misstep, and he recovered from it. I think a team that drafts Travis Hunter should give him every opportunity to play both sides of the football and be the player that he thinks he can be. But to ask him to do both all the time, right out of the gate as a rookie, I think that's too much. But he is different. And I think he's going to be able to do it. Just maybe not game 1, game 2, game 3 of his NFL career. 719-247-1313. Take your thoughts on the 3 stories that are driving the show. Nuggets and Bucks coming up at the bottom of the hour here on Extra Sports 1300. Nuggets and Bucks tonight on your airwaves. Our coverage from altitude starting at the bottom of this very hour, so less than 8 minutes from now. Use this information how you wish. Cha-ching, cha-ching. Giannis will be on a minutes restriction, according to Doc Rivers. And Bucks fans are apparently not very happy about this, but Giannis will play. It will be Giannis, and it will be Jokic, and it will be Damian Lillard and Jamal Murray. So a pretty good matchup tonight. And I've said this week for the Denver Nuggets is just about being ready for Sunday. Right? If Sunday will ultimately tell the tale of how good of a week this was for the Denver Nuggets. They could win against the Pacers. They could win tonight. They could win, tomorrow against Detroit. Looks like a really good win if they can get it. Have you seen Detroit lately? They've won 8 in a row. And they're just going to be sitting waiting for the Denver Nuggets, who have to play them on a second night of a back-to-back. So the Nuggets, if they win tonight, win Friday, those are all good wins. That's 3 really good wins in a row. But if they, for whatever reason, aren't up to the task on Sunday against Boston, these games won't matter. And conversely, let's say tonight they lose or they run into a hot Pistons team, second night of a back-to-back, and they get beat by the Pistons. They turn around and win on Sunday. It's a great week. Sunday, beating the Boston Celtics would be the best win of their season. And the gap between that and their next best win might not be particularly close. Their win against Oklahoma City was in November. Their win against the Lakers at Crypto was in a completely different era of Laker basketball. They haven't beaten Minnesota. They haven't beaten Houston. They haven't beaten Boston. They haven't beaten Cleveland. So whatever happens between now and Sunday, it's about Sunday. And even though Bucks fans are a little bit upset about Giannis not being on a minutes restriction, I would say that given that Boston would be their third game in 4 days, if I'm Michael Malone, understanding the gravity of that game on Sunday because you just came off of a big-time game this past Saturday that did not go very well. I don't love load management, but the Nuggets have to be right on Sunday. There's a world where they could be right on Monday, right tonight, right tomorrow, and right on Sunday. That's fine. But they better be right on Sunday. They better give Boston. It doesn't have to be, and I think there's some room that they don't have to necessarily. Well, I think they have to beat Boston. Yeah, they're going to have to beat Boston. See what the Knicks are going through right now? Because of their record against the best teams in the NBA. Nuggets have done enough losing to these kind of teams. They really need to beat Boston. If they want it, not that they care, I guess, but for me to change my mind on the Denver Nuggets, and I'm willing to change my mind on the Denver Nuggets. I got to have a win to look at. I got to be able to point to some performance and say, that's that. And beating the Indiana Pacers is not one. That's the point I made on Tuesday. Like, it's just not a game where I'm going to say, look at the Nuggets, title contenders, because they beat Indiana. They need to beat Boston on Sunday. Even if they lose tonight and lose tomorrow, if they beat Boston, that's what matters. And conversely, if they win tonight and they win tomorrow, even ending Detroit's 8-game winning streak, and they lose on Sunday, it'll all be for naught. There are games that matter more. And that's Sunday. But we'll see how they fare tonight. Certainly they can figure some things out, get some things right, so they're at their best for Sunday. Played a good game. Beat a good basketball team on Monday. And tonight would be the same thing. It would be another quality win on the road against a very good team. But it's all about Sunday. Again, that's coming up here in just a couple of minutes here on Extra Sports 1300. In fact, tomorrow, speaking of, we'll have both the Nuggets and the Avs on, because the Avs will be in action against the Wild tomorrow night. So busy day, short show tomorrow. So make sure you're in at 3 so we can get whatever business we need to get done in that 90 minutes. But it has been my distinct honor and pleasure to serve you today. Appreciate the interaction as always. Coming up in 1 minute, Nuggets and Bucks here on Extra Sports 1300.